already 10 minutes delayed, so it's okay. Let's start the next session. But I have some announcements as usual, and I'm going to repeat these announcements after every coffee break. Well, first of all, related to tonight's dinner, we will, most of you already know, but we will meet here at 7, and we'll go together to the restaurant. It's not far away, but we will need to take the subway for one stop. Actually, funicular, we will go to Taksim, but we are printing a map of the restaurant, so in case some of you might want to come to the restaurant by yourself, so that you will have also the map with you showing where the restaurant exactly is. And so I do suggest you to come to dinner. Last year's dinner proved itself to be a very good opportunity to socialize, and it will be a nice dinner, and also not expensive in Istanbul's prices, food prices. So I do recommend it, first of all. And secondly, we have some tiny changes in tomorrow's program, because some of our presenters couldn't manage to come to Istanbul at all. So we reprinted the program. Today we have no changes, but tomorrow there are some tiny changes. So if you are planning to come tomorrow too, please get another copy of the program. So everyone is already here, and I'm not going to talk anymore. So it's your turn now.
Hello, my name is Dina Samic. This is my colleague Nermina Zagora. We come from Sarajevo, and today we will present a paper entitled Interiors from Visual Art Perspective, Film as a Portrait and Tool for Introspection. Can you hear me? No. Is it better now? Yeah. So our research was based on parallel analysis of so-called character or atmosphere of space, which can be defined as the specificity which distincts space from place and house from home. From the perspective of architectural phenomenology and through comparative analysis of works of 4 visual artists, we explore the ways in which domestic interiors reflect narratives and multiple layers of interiority of their inhabitants. Distinction between notions of house and home can be viewed through the perspective of phenomenology of architecture in analogy with the space-place relationship. According to Christian Norberg Schul's definition, space is geometric and abstract, while place is concrete space with character. Accordingly, house can be viewed as a construction or a building, while home represents a house with personal, cultural, and symbolic meanings. Architectural design is creative integration of material details and phenomenological strata. In everyday life, this phenomenological strata is not perceptible to human optics. Fortunately, some of the contemporary artists who have approached the problem of the invisible spirit use their art as a source of information capable of revealing soundless, invisible, and untouchable characteristics of the space. In other words, artists are using their work to expose specificities not perceptible to common optics. Moreover, while architects are in general preoccupied with issues of architecture's outside and form, visual artists are more often focused on exploring issues of interiority, and a term referring both to architecture and people. Therefore, their work can contribute to better understanding of phenomena such as character and atmosphere, which distinguish place from space and home from house. Following the route of a phenomenological approach, this paper is exploring the thesis that home interiors can reveal narratives and multiple layers of interiority of their inhabitants through comparative analysis of works of four artists: Gordon Mata Clark, Rachel Whiteford, Annette Merrill, and Olafur Eliasson. To start, we will analyze the surgical approach of Gordon Mata Clark. We are surely in debt to Gordon Mata Clark for having revealed to us the outside-inside relation of the space. In his best-known work, Splitting, the artist has involved notions of boundary and envelope by blurring the edges between what we see and the secret interior life of the house. This was achieved by making a strong cut through the abundant suburban American house, from top to bottom. This cut is exposing, in a quite violent way, all the layers of the past, the domestic intimacy. The house does not offer any longer shelter and security by being enclosed. The contrast between warm and luminous inside and cold and dangerous outside has been broken. Hence, the overall effect on the observer is quite disturbing, yet the disturbance does not come from the physical violence and damage of the envelope, but from the tangible level of intimate energy revealed in this process. We are almost embarrassed by witnessing the uncovering of somebody else's vulnerable, familiar atmosphere. What are the implications of Gordon Mata Clark's projects on architecture? According to James Wise, Gordon Mata Clark is the only true deconstructivist architect. His surgical approach consisted of exposing the hidden potential of old buildings by intervening with their physical envelope and thus releasing a new level of energy or the spirit of the place. However, if we want to make an architectural link, we would certainly have to parallel the work of Peter Einzelmann or Bernard Schumi, even though they probably would not agree. Both authors have associated the definition of inside-outside relation with varying degree of extension and enclosure of the interior. Both have paid particular attention to the boundaries, building envelope, and other elements which permit a passage from one space to another.
On the other hand, Rachel Whiteford's sculptural approach gives us a different perspective on envisioning the spirit of place, the spirit of home. Even though she is using the same elements as Mata Clark, space, void, solid, Whiteford is in fact transforming void into solid, the immaterial into tangible. Her projects are plaster casts of rooms of an old house, as in the project of named The Ghost, and of the entire Victorian terrace house, the house, representing a petrified ode, a monument to memory, to the years of life and use of these buildings. The power of Whiteford's work lies in ambiguity, which is created in dynamic interplay of associations of life and death, of familiar and foreign, void and solid. Her sculptures remind us of all the things that make a house home, some of which we're not even aware of, but also of the passing of cycle of life, of buildings and humans. Even though they're employing different techniques and approaches, both Mata Clark and Whiteford are using artwork as a medium to create different perspective on meanings of home, issues such as identity, privacy and intimacy. Whiteford's work can be viewed in analogy with the sculptural approach in architectural design by Zaha Hadid, especially in the formalist manner of composing solids and exposing them to the outside. Among artists who have used home interiors as experiment grounds for tackling notions of intimacy, individuality and containment, we should mention Danish artist Annette Merrill, whose photographical investigations of homes of common people denote a questioning of how we inhabit and personalize a space. In the Room project, Merrill has photographed over 100 typical living rooms in 9 countries, each one using the same angle, equal height, and under the same lighting. By focusing her empirical study on interiors with similar spatial configuration, Merrill is questioning different individual expressions of the site containment and occupancy, showing a high level of variation between photographed domestic ambient. Unlike Mata Clark and Whitehead, who have worked with dying abandoned houses and their remaining spiritual energies, Merrill's photographs capture the moment in life of different homes. Using scientific survey method, Merrill implies that the elements which constitute the home interior, which is shapes, colors, arrangements, are concrete manifestations of user's character and identity. Her photo collection is in fact an alternative portrait gallery which shows that home interiors are even more expressive than the portraits of residents themselves. The Room project not only depicts true intimacy of home, but it tackles important cultural issues, as her photograph speaks a variety of different languages and uncovers a variety of cultural origins. Cultural dimension of this project, as well as the creative alternation of the old and the new, of the familiar and foreign, can be associated with the juxtaposition of traditional Portuguese interiors within the contemporary design of Casa de Música in Porto by Oma, which is an architectural example. Another artist that we elaborated, whose work we elaborated in this paper is Olivier Eliasson, who is important for his sensorial approach. Eliasson's project, Your House, is created out of the same elements as in cases of projects of Mata Clark and Whitehead, such as spatial negatives, cross-sections of house, structure, layers, perspective views, interior, etc. However, his manipulation of these elements is quite new and innovative, as it encompasses the use of high technology, along with his interpretation of the concept of home. The sensorial experience of reading the book with laser-cut pages that together create a three-dimensional interior of a house can be identified with the reading of history of its existence and use, containment and occupancy. The book allows us to familiarize ourselves with sequences of interior spaces and universal elements that trigger the meaning of home in our own memory. In addition to studies on physical decomposition of architectural structure and spatiality, most important aspect of Eliasson's work regards experiments in the ambit of multi-sensory experience of space. In his numerous installations, including Beauty, Your Atmospheric Color Atlas, The Weather Project, etc., Eliasson is revealing intangible characteristics of interior space by accentuating its atmospheric qualities, using light, water, temperature to create unique multisensory experience. In this way, he is amplifying the experiential perception of space with all senses, making it more available and understandable to general public. This aspect of his work is quite similar to certain elements of architectural approach of Peter Zumthor and other contemporary architects concerned with phenomenology of architecture. It is perhaps that these atmospheric phenomena that can contain the spirit of place. And in conclusion, analyzed cases illustrate surgical, sculptural, empirical, and sensorial approaches that artists apply while revealing those hidden personal, emotional, social, and cultural meanings and messages that are inscribed in the places we inhabit. Their work draws our attention to significance of complex human relationship with space, memory, spirit of place that accompany buildings until the end of their life cycle. On the other hand, some highly designed environments lack this potential for identifications of their users. In Heidegger's writings, the concept of place identity determines human identity. Quotation, human identity presupposes the identity of place. In other words, the key to strong and positive relation between architecture and its users lies in identification with the place. These cases demonstrate that by challenging the sensorial, emotional, and ephemeral characteristics of architecture, we can redefine the entire concept of interiors. This is why we highlighted the analytical critical dimension of their work and messages they convey as a meaningful contribution to contemporary architectural practice. We should be reminded of the role of users and their needs in the process of transformation of an abstract space into a place with identity, and transformation of an empty house into a home with spirit and vital energy. Hence, we should think about home as a work-in-progress canvas, enabling the symbiosis of design with the individual narratives of each user, paving the way for a more human-friendly architecture. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Catherine Anthony, and I'm on the faculty at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and which is in the United States, and I am about 2.5 hours south of Chicago. I've been the... Could somebody fix the sound if that's possible? It sounds like a foghorn going on, but I don't think there's... You think it really is? You think it really is? Oh, okay, well, maybe the real thing. Okay, I'll talk over it. Anyway, I'm the longest serving female faculty at the University of Illinois. I've been there 28 years, but I've never been to Turkey before. So I wanted to thank the conference organizers for all their efforts on our behalf to bring us here, because we wouldn't have been here if it weren't for this interesting conference. It's giving us a lot to talk about, and I'm especially enjoying the chance to meet so many people from many different countries that have typically not been represented at other conferences that I've gone to. So it's been an enjoyable experience. So let's see, let's get rid of this guy here. Okay. I'm here today to talk about modern homes in American movies, television, and advertisements, from a culture of paranoia to a culture of cool. And just a little bit of background to what this paper is about and what my presentation is about. The paper is published in full in the conference proceedings, so I don't have time to talk about everything that's in there, but I'll just give you some of the highlights here. I had an opportunity this last spring to teach a course, a brand new course in architecture, cinema, environment, and behavior. I've been teaching in the area of environment behavior for many years, actually all my career, but the cinema part was new to me, and I really wanted to include the environment behavior aspect with that too. So how the spaces and places in cinemas reflected the characters that were being portrayed. So what were the relationships between the two? It was a graduate seminar. We had about 20 students in the class, and it was really, really interesting. The class filled up right away, actually, before we even started the first day of class. I'm going to be offering it again this next spring, but a huge amount of interest in it, and I had some really good students. And so two of the students in the class, Emily Kester and Aaron Merchant, worked together on this particular paper that we're going to be talking about, and I told them their paper was too good, it was too interesting, and it deserved a bigger, broader audience. So when I saw that this conference was taking place, I snagged them, they both graduated, and I said, listen, let's work together, the three of us, to help get this paper ready for an international audience. So the two former students are working, they're practicing architects now in the Midwest, and the three of us got together during the summer to rework their paper to get it ready for you, and hopefully for some publication maybe elsewhere too. Basically, in his essay, Tearing Down the House, Modern Homes in the Movies, in Mark Lamster's book, Architecture and Film, Art and design scholar Joseph Rosa notes that modern domestic architecture has frequently been associated with misanthropic or malevolent characters in Hollywood films throughout the latter half of the 20th century. In other words, the bad guys often lived in modern homes, and they weren't very likable characters. Modern domestic architecture, he argues, has become identified almost exclusively with characters who are evil, unstable, selfish, and driven by pleasures of the flesh. And he wrote this article, this chapter, in the year 2000, and it was one of the required readings for the course, actually. The book Architecture and Film is one that is a fascinating book that we used. We used some other sources of some other texts as well. A very, very good book on Hitchcock, by the way, that we used as well. But this turned out to be one of the best ones. So what the students did in the class is they reviewed the works that Rosa included in his chapter, and then in addition, they updated it because his work ended in the late 1990s and they added more films after that. So a number of influencing factors are posed as possible explanations for this phenomenon, among them that modern domestic architecture has long been perceived by the American public as a threat to traditional values, that American culture, by and large, is inherently averse to the idea of minimalist living or starting from zero, and that a collective, pervasive, simultaneous sense of both awe and skepticism exists around modernity in American culture, particularly with regard to scientific and technological achievements. Here you see some skepticism of modernism and modern architecture by Tom Wolfe, a famous author, literary critic, in his book From Bauhaus to Our House, now a classic that's been out a number of years. But he talked about, without a peep they move in even though the glass box appalls them all. So again, how popular critics and how popular audiences viewed modern architecture is very different from the way in which we in the architectural profession have viewed modern architecture. And I think that's one of the major points of the paper here today. The negative characterizations of modern dwellings began cropping up in films around the middle of the 20th century, so around the 1950s, when the US and the Soviet Union were engaged in what became a decades-long Cold War. And you see here some images of that time. The perceived threat of communism became an integral part of the American psyche. The culture, values, and virtues of American democracy were believed to be under attack by spies, saboteurs, and malcontents, both from the outside and from within. This culture of paranoia and suspicion begat political theatrics such as the infamous House Committee on Un-American Activities, a dark chapter in the history of the Hollywood film industry. You see here a photograph of Senator Joe McCarthy, who was the leader of this movement, who actually was accusing many individuals all over the country of being communists, and they got into a lot of trouble because of this, including many in the film industry as well. It comes as little surprise then that modern domestic architecture, which was born out of the ferment and turmoil of emerging European social democracies, was viewed as an affront to the American way of life. Elizabeth Gordon, oh, and hang on a second. This is an image also relates to one of the sessions that we had on the very first day. Here you see Edith Farnsworth and Mies van der Rohe, the Court of Public Opinion, her famous house in Plano, Illinois, which architects tout as being a beautiful home and one of the icons of modern architecture. But as some of you may know, she got in a big fight with Mies van der Rohe about this house and the furniture that he provided for her that she didn't want. There was a big lawsuit about it, and it actually became a very well-known controversy all over the nation. So it didn't do too much good for the image of modern architecture to know that this big fight was going on in the press and that she didn't like the house and she didn't like the furniture. So Elizabeth Gordon, who was then the editor of the magazine House Beautiful, which is a very popular magazine subscribed to by a huge population in the United States, she echoed this sentiment in her April 1953 editorial, "The Threat to the Next America," which put forth a scathing indictment of high modernism's growing influence on the American domestic realm. And the quote that she put here, there's a well-established movement in modern architecture, decorating and furnishings, which is promoting the mystical idea that, quote, less is more, unquote. They are promoting unlivability, stripped down emptiness, lack of storage space, and therefore lack of possessions. these arbiters make such a consistent attack on comfort, convenience, and functional values that it becomes, in reality, an attack on reason itself. For if the mind of man can be manipulated in one great phase of life to be made willing to accept less, it would be possible to go on and get him to accept less in all phases of life. Okay, so she was really very much against this modern movement in architecture. And the essence of her argument was that to embrace modern domestic architecture and its dictated order was to eschew the very principles of freedom and democracy that define American society, principles that the nation had just fought to defend and preserve at great expense just a few short years ago. This festering